You ever get the feeling that, like, some philosophical thinkers, they just operate on a completely different wavelength than, like, almost everyone else? Today we're going deep into the world of one of those thinkers, Shihab al-Din al-Suhrawardi, a 12th century Persian philosopher who founded something called Illuminationism.
Yeah, so trying to explain his ideas to someone, let's say another philosopher steeped in the Western tradition, it's kind of like trying to explain quantum mechanics to someone who's only ever studied Newtonian physics. It's just a completely different framework for understanding the world.
A completely different framework. And we're talking about a major figure too, right? Someone who was incredibly influential within Islamic philosophy, but who's only recently started to get the attention he deserves in the West.
Right, exactly. And that's partly because until fairly recently, there just weren't any good translations of his work available in English or other European languages.
Okay, so that lack of accessibility is a big part of it. But it sounds like even if we did have those translations, his work is just inherently challenging, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was working within the Islamic philosophical tradition, but he was also drawing on ancient Greek philosophy, especially Plato and Neoplatonism, and also incorporating elements of what some scholars believe to be ancient Persian wisdom traditions.
Ancient Persian wisdom. Okay, that's fascinating. So, like, where do we even begin with someone like that? What are the absolute must-know points if we're trying to understand his philosophy?
Well, I think the first thing to understand is that Suhrawardi was deeply critical of the dominant philosophical school of his time, which was Avicennan Peripateticism.
Avicenna Peripateticism, now, just as a reminder for our listeners, that's the school of Islamic philosophy that was heavily influenced by Aristotle, right?
Exactly. It was basically the Islamic interpretation of Aristotle, and it was incredibly influential for centuries. But Suhrawardi saw some serious problems with it, and he developed his own system of philosophy called Illuminationism to address those problems.
So he's not just critiquing the Peripatetics, he's actually offering a completely different way of thinking about philosophy, right? A different set of first principles, so to speak. Right, and that's one of the things that makes him so interesting. He's not just tweaking things around the edges, he's proposing a fundamentally new way of understanding the world and our place in it.
So where should we start with this new way of understanding the world?
Well, I think a good place to start is with his critique of Avicenna's logic. Suhrawardi was really interested in logic, but he thought that Avicenna's system was too focused on essential definitions and syllogistic reasoning.
Okay, and what was wrong with that?
Well, Suhrawardi argued that essential definitions are impossible to achieve because we can never fully grasp the essence of a thing. Also, he thought that syllogistic reasoning was too limited and that it couldn't account for the full range of human knowledge.
So he's saying that the way the Peripatetics were doing logic was too narrow, too focused on this like abstract realm of essences and not paying enough attention to the way that we actually experience the world, right?
Exactly. He thought that our experience of the world should be the starting point for philosophy, not abstract concepts, and that's where his concept of illumination comes in.
Okay, so let's talk about illumination. This is like the central concept in his philosophy, right?
Right. Illumination, or ishraq in Arabic, is the direct intuitive knowledge that we gain through a kind of spiritual unveiling.
A spiritual unveiling. So it's not something that we arrive at through reason or logic. It's more like a flash of insight, a sudden realization.
Exactly. And Suhrawardi believed that this kind of knowledge is more certain and more foundational than any knowledge that we can gain through discursive reasoning.
And more certain and more foundational. That's a pretty bold claim. I mean, that's basically turning the whole philosophical tradition on its head, right?
Yeah, it is a pretty radical idea, and it goes against a lot of what had been taken for granted in philosophy up to that point. But Suhrawardi was convinced that illumination was the only way to truly know ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, so how do we get to this illumination? What's the process?
Well, Suhrawardi talks about it in terms of a journey or a path, and he says that it involves a lot of things like spiritual purification, contemplation, meditation, and even visions.
Visions. Wow. So it sounds like it's not just about thinking hard about things. It's cultivating a certain kind of inner state, a kind of openness to receiving this knowledge.
Exactly. It's about preparing ourselves to receive this light of illumination. And it's not something that's guaranteed to happen either. It's something that we have to work towards, and it's a process that can take a lifetime.
So this is not for the intellectually faint of heart, it sounds like.
No, it's definitely not. But Suhrawardi believed that it was worth the effort because the knowledge that we gain through illumination is the most important knowledge that we can possibly have.
Okay, so we've got this concept of illumination, which is all about direct intuitive knowledge. And that leads us to another key concept in Suhrawardi's philosophy, which is knowledge by presence.
Yes, knowledge by presence, or ilm huduri, is the idea that true knowledge is not about having a mental representation of something, but about being directly present to it.
Being directly present to it. So instead of having a picture of a tree in my mind, I actually have to be experiencing the tree itself in order to truly know it.
Right, exactly. And Suhrawardi uses the example of pain to illustrate this point. He says that when we experience pain, we don't need a mental representation of pain in order to know that we're in pain. We simply are present to the pain itself.
So knowledge by presence is about this immediate, unmediated experience of something. And it's through this kind of experience that we come to know the world around us and even ourselves.
Exactly, and this is where Suhrawardi's metaphysics comes in. He believed that reality is fundamentally structured by light, and that this light is not just something that exists out there in the world, but is also the very ground of our own being.
Okay, so this is getting into some pretty heady stuff now.
Yeah.
We've got illumination, we've got knowledge by presence, and now we're talking about light as the foundation of reality. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. So Suhrawardi's ontology is based on the idea that everything that exists is ultimately a manifestation of light. He called this the light of lights, and he believed that it's the source of all being and all knowledge.
Okay, but hold on a second. Light is usually thought of as a physical phenomenon, right? Like the light from the sun or a lamp. So how can it be the foundation of everything that exists, including things that aren't physical?
Well, Suhrawardi's concept of light is a little bit different from our everyday understanding. He's not just talking about physical light. He's talking about light as a kind of metaphysical principle, a kind of pure intelligibility that pervades all of reality.
Pure intelligibility. So it's more like a kind of consciousness or awareness than it is like the light that we can see with our eyes.
Right, exactly. And Suhrawardi believed that this light is hierarchical with different levels of intensity and perfection. At the very top is the light of lights, which is the source of all other lights. And then there are various levels of lesser lights all the way down to the material world, which is the least luminous level of reality.
So everything in the universe is ultimately a manifestation of this light of lights, just to varying degrees.
Exactly. And our goal as human beings is to ascend through these levels of light to get closer and closer to the source.
And how do we do that?
Through the process of illumination, remember, by cultivating our inner awareness and becoming more receptive to the light that's already within us.
Okay, so it's all starting to come together now.
Yeah.
We've got this idea of illumination as a path to knowledge, and we've got this metaphysics of light that explains the structure of reality. But how does this all fit together with his theory of knowledge by presence?
Well, Suhrawardi believed that the more illuminated we become, the more present we are to ourselves and to the world around us. And the more present we are, the more we realize that we are ultimately one with the light of lights.
One with the light of light. So it's not just about knowing things, it's about actually becoming one with the source of all being.
Exactly. And that's the ultimate goal of Illuminationism, to achieve this state of unity with the divine.
That's a pretty lofty goal.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Suhrawardi believed that it was possible for human beings to achieve this kind of enlightenment.
Oh, absolutely. He was convinced of it. In fact, he even claimed that he had experienced this unity himself through his own spiritual practices.
Now, Suhrawardi didn't just leave us with these abstract philosophical ideas, did he? He actually developed a pretty elaborate cosmology to explain how these principles play out in the universe.
Right, he did. He came up with this really interesting idea of the world of images, or the alama al-methal, which is kind of like an intermediary realm between the physical world and the world of pure light.
Okay, so we've got the physical world down here, the world of pure light up there, and then this world of images in between. What exactly is this world of images?
Well, Suhrawardi described it as a realm of suspended images or immaterial shapes, and he believed that it's the place where our souls go after death.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like a spiritual waiting room where we go to be judged and to prepare for our ultimate destiny.
Yeah, something like that. And Suhrawardi believed that the experiences we have in the world of images are determined by the level of illumination that we've achieved in this life.
So if we've lived a good life and we've cultivated our inner light, then we'll have a positive experience in the world of images.
Right, and if we haven't, then we'll have a negative experience.
Now, this world of images sounds like a pretty wild concept. I mean, it's not something that you hear about in most philosophical systems. How did Suhrawardi come up with this idea?
Well, there are a couple of different theories. One theory is that he was influenced by ancient Persian mythology, which includes a similar concept of an intermediary realm between the material world and the spiritual world. Another theory is that he was trying to reconcile the Islamic belief in an afterlife with his own philosophical ideas about the nature of reality.
So regardless of where the idea came from, It's clear that the world of images played a really important role in Suhrawardi's cosmology, and it also helps to explain some of his more mystical ideas about the afterlife.
Exactly, and it's just one example of how Suhrawardi's philosophy is this really rich and complex blend of different influences. He was drawing on Greek philosophy, Islamic theology, Persian mysticism, and probably other traditions that we don't even know about.
It's really remarkable how he was able to synthesize all of these different ideas into a coherent philosophical system. And his work has continued to be influential for centuries, right?
Oh, absolutely. His ideas had a huge impact on later Islamic philosophers like Mullah Sadra, and they're still being studied and debated by scholars today.
It makes you wonder what Suhrawardi would have thought about the state of the world today.
Hmm.
I mean, his philosophy is all about light and illumination, and it seems like we could really use some of that right now.
Yeah, no kidding. I think his ideas are as relevant today as they ever were, and I think they offer a really important perspective on the challenges that we're facing in the 21st century.
Well, on that note, I think we've just about reached the end of our deep dive into the philosophy of Shihab al-Din al-Suhrawardi. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
Yeah, just that if you're at all interested in exploring some really profound and challenging philosophical ideas, I highly recommend checking out Suhrawardi's work. It's not always easygoing, but it's definitely worth the effort.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe you'll even experience a little bit of illumination along the way.
You never know.
Thanks for joining us today,
My pleasure.
and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.